How can Gaza be rebuilt? Israel's war against Hamas has led to unprecedented death and destruction. As well as the tens of thousands of lives lost, millions have been displaced and large parts of the territory have been utterly devastated. But even as the fighting continues, some observers are starting to think about what happens next. While any plans will be unclear at this stage, what can be said for sure is that it will be a truly enormous task. So, just what exactly would it take to reconstruct Gaza? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security, and statehood. While the world tends to focus on conflicts while fighting rages, less attention is usually given to what happens when the violence stops. Reconstruction may not be regarded as the most exciting topic, but it is absolutely crucial. If handled well, it can underpin long-term peace. However, if poorly managed, it can lead to more war. But reconstruction is an exceptionally complex, lengthy, and costly process. In addition to rebuilding shattered lives and infrastructure, such as homes, schools, hospitals, and roads, it means laying the foundations for sustainable peace. This involves creating governance structures, managing complex security tasks, encouraging economic development, and even promoting reconciliation. All this invariably requires a vast international commitment lasting years, if not decades. In addition to huge amounts of money, it also involves thousands of personnel and significant political input, especially from key global and regional actors. One of the most important examples of post-conflict reconstruction on the horizon is Gaza. After many months of violent conflict that's utterly destroyed the territory, it's perhaps time to think about what could happen next. Hamas's brutal attack against Israel on the 7th of October 2023 opened a new phase in the long-standing conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. After carrying out one of the heaviest air bombardments in history, just 2 weeks later, Israeli forces launched a ground invasion. Over the following months, they cleared the north and centre of the Strip, forcing over 1 million people to flee to the south, where they're now cramped in terrible conditions. All this has led to unprecedented death and destruction. According to current estimates, almost 35,000 people have been killed and nearly 80,000 have been wounded, many with life-changing injuries. Meanwhile, the scale of physical destruction is enormous. A joint World Bank-UN report produced at the start of April 2024 estimated the total infrastructure damage to be around $18.5 billion. Almost 3/4 of this has been done to housing, just under 20% to schools, hospitals, clinics and other public buildings, and the remaining 9% to commercial buildings and factories. But as the war now appears to be entering its final stage, with Israel seemingly preparing to launch an assault on the south, thoughts are already turning to what could possibly come next. While it's unclear what Israel has planned for Gaza, with suggestions of another occupation or even steps to force the remaining Palestinians to flee the territory, many will be looking to the possibility of an Israeli withdrawal and efforts to reconstruct Gaza. But just what exactly would this have to involve? Of course, the first step will be to stabilise the situation. While numerous aid organisations, including UN bodies and leading international charities, have been active in Gaza throughout the conflict, more will be needed to be done to provide the territory with urgent food, medical care, shelter and sanitation once the fighting ends. But that's just the most immediate requirement. The next step will be to establish a new administration to oversee the territory and coordinate the reconstruction efforts. One option would be to extend the Palestinian Authority's control into the area. While this would offer the benefits of local knowledge and local ownership, it comes with significant potential disadvantages. The Palestinian Authority may be unable to cope with the vast scale of the task at hand. Moreover, Israel could well veto it. Regardless of whether one likes it or not, Israel's engagement will in fact be vital to any reconstruction process. Instead, the sheer scale and scope of the task would make some form of international administration a far better option. The most obvious candidate would of course be the United Nations. It has a track record of taking on such missions, having carried out complex state-building missions in East Timor, Kosovo and Cambodia. However, it could also fall to another organisation or even a body created especially for the purpose. For instance, one could perhaps see the possibility of the European Union taking on this task, perhaps in conjunction with the Arab League or the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation. Following this, the next task will be to begin recruiting personnel. This will require thousands of people from a wide variety of backgrounds. In addition to administrators and technical specialists, it will also need governance experts, architects, accountants, engineers, lawyers, economists, and public information professionals, to name just a few. But as important as creating a new administrative body is, it can only work if the security situation is also addressed. This will also require tackling several distinct elements. For a start, there's the question of securing law and order. For the past decade and a half, Hamas has controlled the territory, enforcing its own brand of justice. Now that it's gone, a new police force must be created and trained to international standards. However, to get this up and running, an international policing mission will likely be needed. At the same time, a more formal military-based peacekeeping force will almost certainly be required. This will not only oversee any Israeli pullout, but will also be tasked with ensuring that as Gaza rebuilds, it doesn't pose a threat to Israel, or vice versa. But this isn't all. Gaza is now littered with unexploded bombs and ordnance that will need to be removed. This will require specialist disposal teams. But putting together such a large integrated security mission will also pose significant issues. It'll need to be trusted by both the Palestinians and the Israelis. This will necessarily shape the countries that can participate. Most obviously, it can't include troops from countries that oppose Israel's existence. As well as Iran, this is likely to discount troops from Pakistan or Bangladesh, both of which regularly contribute to UN peacekeeping missions elsewhere. Meanwhile, some countries, such as the United States, will be unacceptable to ordinary Palestinians and may even become a target for remaining militants. Likewise, other NATO and EU member states might also be unwelcome. Then there's the question of whether there could be contributions from Arab and Muslim states that recognise Israel. These include Egypt, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Morocco and Bahrain. While these countries would almost certainly be acceptable to Palestinians, Israel may feel nervous about whether they could truly trust contingents from these states to push back against any renewed Palestinian insurgent activity. While this would certainly reduce the pool of countries available, it would still leave many other states with a long history of peacekeeping. It's only when these basic functions of stabilisation, governance and security have been put in place that the real task of rebuilding can begin in earnest. And this is where the all-important question of money will come into things. In addition to the vast sums needed to rebuild the physical infrastructure, funds will also be needed for investment. This will be vital to spur economic development and thus provide much needed jobs. But where will all this come from? In such cases, the usual starting point is a donor conference. Bringing together representatives of various states and organisations, these events provide a chance to lay out the exact reconstruction requirements and secure financial contributions. The main international financial institutions would likely include the World Bank and the IMF, as well as regional and other bodies. These would include organisations such as the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the European Investment Bank, and the Islamic Development Bank. While the United States would almost certainly be a major contributor, other key partners would include the European Union and individual EU states, along with Britain, Switzerland, Norway, Canada and Japan. In addition, many Arab and Muslim states, including Saudi Arabia, Turkey and the Gulf Arab states, would also be expected to contribute. Indeed, their participation could be politically valuable. It would show solidarity with the Palestinians and also give them a reason to ensure that the situation remains stable going ahead. The problem is that while many countries are willing to commit to providing aid on paper, history has shown that often they don't deliver on their promised contributions. It's only when all this has been secured that the full-scale task of rebuilding Gaza's physical infrastructure can begin in earnest. But even then, there will be much more to do. Steps will also be needed to construct a new political system and build peace. In addition to establishing the institutions of governance, this also means tackling deep-rooted issues such as corruption and inequality and securing human rights. Meanwhile, all of this must be underpinned by conflict prevention efforts. This means promoting reconciliation and tackling radicalisation. But even then, there will be fears about a return to power by Hamas or some other new militant group that's determined to restart attacks on Israel. On top of maintaining a long-term security presence on the ground, this may also require installing some sort of international political overseer. A good example is Bosnia. Almost 3 decades after the end of the war, an international official remains in place with the power to overturn laws that are considered contrary to the agreement and even sack officials who are seen to be working against the peace settlement. The trouble is that this sort of long-term international oversight is controversial. There have long been criticisms that such state-building exercises fail to respect local conditions and make little effort to win over local support. This can mean that when the mission withdraws, the situation rapidly deteriorates. However, a long-term international presence may just have to be the price to be paid for a sustainable settlement. Of course, at this stage, all this is very much in the realm of speculation. For now, and despite repeated calls for a permanent ceasefire, the war in Gaza continues amid signs that Israel's preparing for a final assault against the south, a step many fear will drastically compound the death and destruction we've already seen. Nevertheless, at some stage, there does need to be some thought given to what happens once the fighting ends. Now, it may be the case that Israel decides to impose another military occupation. If so, this means that the region could face years, if not decades, of further instability. Worse still, there's the spectre that the Palestinians will be forced from the territory in an act of ethnic cleansing. But even assuming an Israeli withdrawal can in fact be secured, there's still the question of ensuring that any reconstruction doesn't merely repeat the previous cycle of rebuilding and destruction that we've seen before. This will require a final peace agreement leading to the creation of a viable and functional Palestinian state. Ultimately, rebuilding Gaza will be a massive task requiring almost unparalleled commitments of time, money, personnel, and political engagement. However, the task can only begin in earnest when the fighting finally stops. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.